What's up, everybody? I'm Katie.
And I'm Morgan.
And this is For Your Misinformation, a podcast dedicated to empowering women to be more politically engaged so we can act in our own best interests.
Let us break down the problem and tell you what we're doing and what you can do to help solve it.
Hi, everybody. I know that there is a lot going on. There's a lot to talk about. And I have a really great interview. But first, I would like to go over what's going on in Georgia. I think that's what is on everybody's mind. So first of all, through the hard work of Stacey Abrams and other BIPOC organizers, we have seen that Georgia is not a red state. It's a purple state with super effective gerrymandering and voter suppression. And we've also seen that the people who use your money most effectively are local grassroots organizers on the ground in Georgia, and Stacey Abrams highlighted some of those. I think that is the most effective thing that you can do this week is donate some money to one of these or any of these organizations. And reminder that if your employer does matching, some of these are 501c3s. So I know that the New Georgia Project and the ACLU of Georgia are both 501c3s. So if you know anybody who has employer matching funds either, that would be a great way to use that. But there's a lot of great organizations. I'll just name a couple. The New Georgia Project, Fair Fight, Black Voters Matter Fund, the ACLU of Georgia, Asian Americans Advancing Justice Atlanta, NAACP of Georgia, Galeo, and Pro Georgia are some great ones. There's even more, and you can see them if you want to go to friendsvotetogether.org/Georgia. I'll put that in the bio too and in our link tree, but they have so much information. So I gave $25 to the New Georgia Project. I gave $25 to the ACLU of Georgia. I did it through Lila, who was on the podcast about the Minneapolis Police Department, or the Minneapolis City Council meeting that was supposed to defund the police department. So I just Venmoed her $50. I said, could you do your employer matching thing? And she did it. And we turned $50 into $100 for Georgia to try and flip the Senate. Because imagine how fucking annoying it would be to still have Mitch McConnell control the Senate. There's so much, I don't know, just let's do what we can to make sure that that's not a thing. So money to grassroots organizations is always an awesome idea. If you are itching to get started volunteering, there are all kinds of opportunities at friendsvotetogether.org/Georgia. There's stuff to do for people who live there, for people who don't live there. There's postcards. Vote Forward is starting their letter writing campaign to Georgia today. So you can do that like we did with the regular election. Or if you'd prefer to just get stuff straight into your email inbox, you can go to votesaveamerica.com and you can adopt Georgia, and they will email you, I think it's weekly, with opportunities, volunteer opportunities that you can help. I'll talk more next time about how comically corrupt, I mean, we've talked about it before, but Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue are, especially compared to Raphael Warnock, who is amazing, and John Ossoff, who is also very inspiring. So yeah, let's make sure we get that done. And then I want to acknowledge the coup that's currently happening that the media seems, it's toothless. It's not going to work. But we're just going to be cool with Mitch McConnell and Bill Barr condoning it so that they can try to raise money for the Senate races in January. It's just, they're shitty people. They're shitty people and they shouldn't be in charge. we shouldn't let them be in charge of anything anymore. And it's crazy that people don't see that line. But anyway, the coup, like even Trump knows that he's lost the election at this point. The coup is a con to raise money for, one, his debt. I mean, Trump is not good with money, despite everything that he would like you to believe. So his supporters that he's conning out of their money, he's sending them emails to say, hey, like this election is fraudulent, which it's not. We need you to donate money to these election lawsuits, and they're giving it to him, but the fine print says that that money is going to go to his like campaign debt and the RNC or something like that. It's crazy. They're being defrauded, which is not a surprise because that's his specialty and it's what he's done his entire life. But so that's what's going on. Maybe explain that to your Trump supporter relatives, because nobody likes to be conned. I don't know if that'll get through to them, but that is what's happening. I'll add one more like fun thing. I guess this will be like my hooray for the week. Lauren Underwood officially won her race here in Illinois, beating out Jim Oberweis, who is a dork. And I'm saying that because I was trying not to use bad language in this episode so much. But even though he didn't win, he went to DC anyway and like posted a picture of it on his Facebook or whatever. And it's like, hey man, you should be embarrassed. Like, I don't even know why they let him in. Like, he's just a dude. He's just a dude. So anyway, we should all have the confidence of Jim Oberweis, who did not win his election, but went to DC anyway for the freshman orientation. Bold. Just bold. But yeah, he's a fucking joke, just like the rest of the Republicans in Congress right now. Even the ones that are standing up and saying that Joe Biden should get security briefings, because what took you so long? So no bonus points for them for doing the bare minimum. But yeah, that's all. Let's all try to do something for Georgia this week, whether it is volunteer by going to friendsvotetogether.org/Georgia, or adopting a state at Vote Save America, or writing letters with Vote Forward. There's lots of stuff that we can do. So let's, between now and the election, commit to doing X amount of work per week to try and get those really good Democratic senators elected in Georgia. So I think that's all. Morgan and I will be back next week with an interview with Steve, our emergency preparedness senior correspondent, to talk about vaccine distribution. I know that's on a lot of people's minds, so we're excited to talk to him about that. They had to turn in plans November 3rd for how to distribute vaccines. So each state has a plan, and we're excited to talk to Steve about what Illinois' plan is and like how it compares to other states. So yeah, and I hope you guys enjoy this interview. Hi, Chris. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm inhaling, exhaling. We got some rain right now, but other than that, going pretty well.
Yeah. If anybody can hear in the background, so Chris and I are both in the west suburbs of Chicago-ish, and it sounds like there's going to be a tornado. I don't think there really is, but if you can hear that, that's what's happening where we are.
Yeah, still to be seen, yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to talk to you. Well, actually, Megan put us in contact, but you have a website called Prairie State Policy, correct?
I do, yeah, I do.
And what is the purpose of that website, and how did that get started?
Yeah, so I actually came up with the idea on Prairie State Policy, I want to say in 2016, 2015. I was a graduate student at Northeastern in Boston, Massachusetts, and I always liked to write, and I'd always liked the more kind of academic side of public policy. Right now, I think we're in a time where there's so much misinformation being thrown out on different policy areas where I always kind of thought about coming up with a reference where a consumer can go to and sort of read policy briefs on what a situation is all about. And that's really sort of the first point of the website. First point is for somebody to go there and search a different policy issue and read about that issue in a short but explanatory and detailed briefing. So, for example, here in the state of Illinois, you often hear the rhetoric on Illinois in the hole. Our finances are all messed up. What's going on with Illinois? Well, a lot of that has to do with our underfunded pension liability. Right now, we have an underfunded pension liability of 137 billion. And you tell that to somebody, and I guess the first reaction is anger, right? The second one is, well, how did we get to that point? And so really what I've tried to do is I create this blog. I've got some people writing for it as well, and sort of articulate those sort of policy issues in just a nonpartisan and easy to follow way where somebody can go read it and at least get some sort of idea on what this situation is all about.
Like,
So
what would
aside
happen if this policy went into effect? Like, how would it affect me? Like, that kind of stuff. Is that
Right.
what you're hoping people get out of it?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, when it comes to the underfunded pension liabilities, how it affects you is, I'm a Illinois taxpayer, is that we basically have a structural deficit where we tried to fix pensions a couple of times in the early 2000s. The court struck down any sort of reform. So how that affects taxpayers is essentially, if we continue with this deficit, that deficit is going to eat up more of the general fund when it comes to the state. Right now, if you look at the numbers, basically, the state has to contribute around 26 to 27%, just in pension payments to the general fund. So with more of the money needed to go to suffice pension payments, the more that affects public services, right? Investing in public services, investing in mechanisms to ease the property tax burden, right? We here in Illinois have a high property tax burden. That's another, a lot of research that we're going to be putting out too on why property taxes are so high, but it all affects in that way. So we really don't have a pension reform. It really does directly, affect taxpayers, because the state's just going to need more revenue and more ways to pay for it. So, I'm actually coming up with a column soon, on it that I just wrote to some publishers, this week. But to your point, the website's really supposed to articulate those sort of issues to get people caring about public policy and really going as a source to understand these complex situations. The second, I guess, way it adds value to people is it serves as a median for elected officials, public managers, activists, anyone who's really interested in public policy or has a policy background to essentially write and put their ideas on the website. So a lot of people will reach out to me and say, hey, this is a great idea. Are you like more of a think tank? And I say we're not really a think tank, but we're more of a think hub. So if anyone's kind of familiar with the website medium.com, essentially a website where people can go to, write columns, post ideas on it. And that's what I kind of hope Prairie State Policy sort of comes along to being, where we have a lot of people write for it and throw ideas on how to solve a lot of these complex issues for the state. So that would be probably the second point of the website.
Okay, cool. I want to talk about, so I read your column about the Illinois Fair Tax Amendment, and I think we have to talk about that. I can't not ask you about it.
Got to, yeah.
So we spoke like briefly last week, and I was like heartbroken about it, that it didn't pass. I don't remember if I've talked about this in an episode yet. Maybe the one with Morgan, probably the one with Morgan. But yeah, it didn't pass. It didn't pass by like 500,000 votes. It wasn't even close. I was heartbroken because it would help so many people. Well, okay. Can you lay out what the like actual real life impact of what passing the Illinois Fair Tax Amendment would have done for, I guess, people who make less than $250,000 a year and people who make more than $250,000 a year? Or just tell me your thoughts on the Illinois Fair Tax
Yeah.
Amendment.
Well, yeah, very good question. A column that I'm coming out with this week deals with sort of that, like after effects on what's going to happen now with it. But a couple things to say on it. I wrote a piece in the Daily Line essentially arguing that when it comes to gradual income taxation, it's not some revolutionary idea. About 32, 33 states in the union use that form of taxation, as well as the federal government. So it's definitely not new. And I'd also looking at and I guess this is another situation. My argument was that you had a lot of money thrown around, both by JB and Ken Griffin. And when we have these big referendums, it has the potential to sway people through anecdotal means in comparison to evidence. So anecdotal meaning what people feel as opposed to what the evidence says. And so when I look at issues, I kind of, especially for issues of taxation, I look at what economists are talking about. And some of the more notable economists identify gradual income taxation as more of an optimal method of taxation, meaning it eases the burden on people. Flat taxes in comparison are regressive because more people have to allocate a bigger percentage of their discretionary income to suffice payments for goods and services.
Well,
and
income inequality is just such a huge issue in America, and like progressive income taxes seem like the only way to do or any kind of redistribution. Like how else, if you can't do a progressive sales tax, like everybody pays the same sales.
You just kind of touched on a good point that I was going to actually say. So, one, that's a good relay. So, one, you're right. When it comes to economic inequality, almost all economists agree that it's a problem. A lot of studies when it comes to economic inequality a lot of publications started to come out, late 80s, early 90s, but over time, I would think even Alan Greenspan, I read some stuff on him. He thinks it's a problem too, but a lot of economists differ on what the cause of it is or what we should do about it. But economic inequality has been growing. Almost all economists, not nearly all economists, would agree to that. The second thing, when it comes to the graduate income tax and affecting that, then that is one benefit. It would more so sort of lessen inequality in the state. But really the primary purposes, I think, when it comes to the graduate income tax and why they wanted to push for it was one, it being an optimal form of taxation, which wasn't talked about nearly at all. Another thing that wasn't really talked about was sort of the quantitative comparisons on what other states have it, how are they doing well, right? But the other, it mostly was sold as, it's fair, right? Mechanisms of fairness. I mean, I think a lot of people would agree that, somebody who is a teacher, a union worker, a laborer pays the same income tax rate as somebody who makes 150K, 250K, 300K. I think most people would agree that is unfair. That's what it mostly was sold on. But secondly, one of the primary reasons or selling was that it was a way to bring in extra revenue to fix the structural deficit. You touched on sales taxation, and that's actually a second part of Illinois structural deficit. And so I want to kind of explain that. So when it comes to the state of Illinois, the common perception is one, where we have a lot of pension liabilities, and we're a very fiscally in trouble state. We have a lot of fiscal situations, which true, 100%. The second kind of perception to that is we have to buckle down on our spending. as a state, which actually if you look at the numbers, it's actually false. We, as a percentage of, if you measure, the budget on spending on goods and services from the year 2000 to the last 20 years, we actually spent the same amount on goods and services adjusted for inflation. So we actually, when it comes to spending as a percentage of GDP on services, we actually are kind of lesser I think we're 39. So we're actually, despite the common perception, not a huge spending state when population and inflation is kind of factored in. That being said, we actually have a structural problem, like a structural deficit. One being the flat income tax. It would be a more optimal system of taxation if they were able to adopt that. We can't do that anymore. That's one way to fix the structural situation that we have.
Because what's going to happen now that we didn't pass it? Like, isn't
right? Yeah,
everybody's taxes are going to go up? Probably a little bit instead of very rich people paying like 14% on whatever they make above $250,000 or whatever. Sorry, I don't have the numbers in front of me. That's probably wrong. But.
Yeah, well, right. And so to that point, the second part of the structural deficit is we have a over reliance on taxing goods as opposed to services, which even a lot of Republicans would agree on tax reform there in that area. So really, when you're combining a flat tax system with a structural problem on our system of taxation really isn't built for a modern economy. We're over reliant on goods as opposed to services. Then you're really in a situation where your liabilities are going to increase every year and you don't have enough revenue coming in to suffice those obligations. More of that has to go to sufficing pensions. We're not going to collect as much when it comes to the outdated system of taxation on goods, and therefore it's a recipe for not a lot of not enough investment in the future because you just don't really have the wiggle room to do that. To your point, there's a lot of to your point, the state is going to be looking for ways to suffice those problems that we really can't fix without reform. Those two structural, and we tried to fix the fair tax, couldn't do it. It would be hard pressed to kind of pass a like taxation reform now because people, it's hard to get somebody to support tax reform, even if it doesn't, even if it'll help them, which we kind of saw right now. Mm-hmm. So really, we're kind of in a state, to your question, where state's in a bad fiscal point right now, looking for revenue. I think the people who sort of marvel at the fair tax defeat, it's going to become the fiscal reality of the state's going to become more of a reality to them, unfortunately, including everybody, because what's going to happen is I think the Tribune came out with a piece I think last week that they were talking about raising that flat income tax rate by 1 percentage point, a 20% increase. So a lot of people, I think, who voted no and were proud to vote no, I want to say that there may be some of them who thought voting no meant not a tax increase in the future.
Right. And, I don't think they realized first of all, the wording is confusing, or was confusing. I heard even smart people repeating talking points back to me like, well, that'll just cause people to move to states that don't have a flat income tax rate. And it's like, there's no evidence to support that, though. You can't just repeat that without knowing whether that's true. So people heard stuff like that made them fearful and didn't realize that if we don't implement a progressive tax rate, then we have to get that money from somewhere, and it's going to come a little bit from everybody instead of, and that's why Ken Griffin dropped $46 million, so he only has to pay a 1% tax increase instead of what the progressive tax would have taxed him a lot, and me and teachers and whatever not so much.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I mean, and a lot of people, everyone wants property tax reform. Everybody on both sides, everyone wants to get, fix that. Everyone wants to fix the fiscal situation that we are in. There's disagreement on how to do that. I think on my side, the fair tax was a step in the right direction to sort of fix the structural problems that we had and get the state the revenue it needs to kind of address sort of the property tax burden, investing in schools, services, allocating more towards pension liabilities. And I guess inconvenient truth right now is that the state's going to have to make a lot of tough decisions on moving forward. So,
Yeah.
I guess we'll see what happens. And yeah.
All right. Well, okay, let's zoom out from Illinois a little bit and think more like federally. I hear the only thing I think I hear anymore that Trump supporters say is, yeah, but my 401k, or yeah, but the economy. Since you know a lot more about like fiscal policies and stuff, do you want to talk about like what their perception of his economy is versus what you think the reality is?
Yeah, and that's a really good question too. I think we spoke a lot, some of this last week. That there's sort of a disconnect between the economy and the perceptions of how the stock market, for example. A lot of people who supported Donald Trump would always point to the successes in the economy, but really, I think what the direction was toward to is the stock market, and there's definitely a disconnect on how the measure of the economy's overall performance and how the stock market is doing.
Yeah.
So
Can,
in
can I ask a
economics,
question real quick? Is it like 50% of Americans have stocks or like are invested in stocks? Like,
yeah, well, so I don't know. I would assume that um, not as many as one would think have money in the stock
okay.
market. But so the thing with the stock market is that if anyone really has a job in which their employer offers a 401k benefit, they'll match their 401k, and that money goes in the stock market. So the stock market does matter. Same thing if someone has a Roth.
Right.
If their employer doesn't offer that sort of benefit, they can go take out a Roth, allocate their paycheck to their own account there, and let that go. So really, when it comes to the stock market is really, it's not the economy. It's a variable when it comes to the economy, but it's not the economy. What the measure of the economy is GDP, and that's a measure by economists that it's essentially the total output of goods and services produced in a country, or it could also be a measure. We have GDP numbers for states as well, but it's really the total output of goods and services when it comes to the overall the country and what they're producing. And actually, in the actual GDP equation, there is I, the variable I, which stands for investment, and you can probably link that to the stock market. So it really is a variable when it comes to the stock market. So when it comes to the stock market, definitely important, but it's not. There are much other variables when it comes to measuring how the economy is doing. And so when it comes to people and Trump, they would say, or they would argue that the stock market's doing great, but to your point, when it comes to inequality, how are wages increasing? What is our rate of GDP? What's inflation like? And so there is definitely a disconnect between how the performance of the stock market is doing and how the average American is doing. So I don't have any numbers, but say that if Trump did have a lot of supporters who may not have 401ks or money in the stock market, then the economic reality for those people, they're not really. The numbers speak that they're not probably doing well because wages haven't really increased. I think I told you last week the story from the last 40 years, when it comes to white males, the median income for white males hasn't really changed in the last 40 years. So wages remain stagnant, which is a concern, but people still want to talk about the stock market. When it comes to other variables like economic performance of wages and other characteristics, we're not really doing so hot.
We're not thriving.
Well, no, not necessarily. I mean, if you, I guess what I was trying to say, I was drawing a blank there, but what I was trying to kind of give an example of was this, the best example to sort of debunk the difference between how someone's economic well-being is compared to the stock market is that compare the rate of employment this year in April, May, June, July to the performance of the stock market. So if you look at the S&P 500, for example, in February, it was doing well. And then when the whole COVID thing started to hit in late February, you would see economic downturn of the S&P 500. And then the rebound actually started beginning in, I want to say May, in May or even late April. It's probably, I think I was looking today, it regained half of what it was prior to the whole COVID thing. So mid-February. So S&P 500 tanked starting in late February and March, started to rise, but by July, essentially rebounded to where more or less was come February. And you take a look at that and you say, okay, so the stock market seems to be doing really well, but what was the rate of unemployment, right? Mm-hmm. So you look at the numbers comparing to the stock market performance to unemployment, and what you would find is, unemployment hitting 14, 16, 15% in March, right? So there's a correlation there between stock market going down and high unemployment, but unemployment remained high even as the stock market returned to its peak in February. So I guess my question to the people who think the stock market is the economy, is that really a good reflection of how the entire economic system is doing? I mean, in July, I think it was a little over 10% when it comes to unemployment. We're still at high unemployment. Mm-hmm. Stock market has been pretty solid, for the most part, since July, so that's just one of many evidence that you have really when it comes to, economic, well-being and a measure in economic, performance.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just so much more interested in how real people's lives are affected. And that has a lot more to do with wages and unemployment. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
And there are states too, you look at, I forget what state I was looking at, but you have some Midwest states too, where the minimum wage is still slightly above, just $7, like some of the southern states too. And one of the problems to touch base on inequality is, prior to 1968, the role of the federal government would essentially raise the minimum wage with the rate of inflation, right? Mm-hmm. So as goods, the cost of price for goods would increase, so would people's wages, because you want to give enough people purchasing power to actually buy the goods and services, right? And so that more or less stopped in 68. And so what you have seen is wages not keep pace with inflation, more so since then. And it's the federal government too. So when the federal government really stopped doing that, it kind of put the burden on states to handle it their own way. Mm-hmm. And so right now we have states where, here in Illinois, I'm blanking on what our minimum wage is, but we have a higher minimum wage compared to other states who may have not rose their wage with either not just rose their wage at all, or not rose their wage in conjunction with the rate of inflation. So what happens there is when you have a country basically not doing that, you have a lot of people getting left behind on purchasing power.
So the federal government's leaving it up to states to decide like what's best for them, but really just like some states are just like leaving their people like
Mhm.
out to dry.
Well, I mean, uh, so I
Like
mean,
I
prior to
guess why would we expect we shouldn't like expect I don't know. Expect people to do the right thing, like they're not going to do it. So we should require it. Like if we
well,
know that like
yeah.
a $7 whatever minimum wage is like not a livable wage,
Mhm.
uh
So that's kind of the debate, I think, where when the federal government stops doing that, then you're dealing with states who have, I guess, a lot of people uh, who are living in states who choose not to raise the wage. They would argue that, oh well, Mississippi's a different economy than New York City. So when you get in that situation where it was more of a federal thing, where the federal government would raise the minimum wage in conjunction with inflation, really they stopped doing it. Then you kind of, I don't want to see that. I don't want to say that the federal government intentionally left a state to kind of leave it on their own part. But now we're in a situation where you have states that that haven't. I think even I forget what state, but you have states who haven't actually rose the minimum wage in a long time. I think the federal government. I think the last time we rose was in 2009. So I think we've gone 10 years without even raising the wage.
I was in high
And
school
that has,
then, so very cool.
yeah, right, yeah. So I mean, that has a dire impact on people's purchasing power. I mean, it's definitely a problem and has definitely a component to it when it comes to one of the factors regarding, income inequality and people's economic well-being and so on and so forth.
Okay, back to sorry. Didn't the stock market okay. Two things happened recently. Joe Biden is assumed going to be the next president of the United States, and Pfizer came out with good-ish results. Morgan and I will. Oh, never mind. We've probably already talked about this, but anyway, and that seemed to stabilize or increase the stock. I don't pay attention to it, so I'm kind of speaking out of like I don't know, probably like headlines that I'm reading, but
Mm-hmm.
like did Trump really do good things for the stock market and the economy? I guess that seems like a
That's
leading
good.
question, but
Good. No, good question. So, and that's another thing too. A lot of people. So when it comes to issues, and this is something I believe too, and I think it's been proven countless times, is really we make in the United States we have a lot of problems, right? We have a lot of problems here in Illinois. People have a lot of problems in Ohio, Wisconsin. But really, when it comes down to it, is how the economy and healthcare are the two probably biggest issues that people care about, unless you live in Louisiana, where I think they actually poll people, and I think abortion was higher than when it comes to the economy and healthcare, which I think both sides too, they want to address definitely a different opinion on how to increase economic mobility. But to that
it
point,
is insane to me that people care more about what like women are doing with their bodies than whether they have health care or not. What are you doing? What are your
yeah,
priorities,
right.
man? Okay, sorry.
Yeah, no,
Continue.
and you right on the ball there too, where it is a healthcare issue too, right? So when it comes to the economic well-being of people, and healthcare can also be connected to that too, because if I broke my leg, if I didn't have insurance, then I'm just hit with a medical bill, and oh my god, how am I going to pay that, right?
Yep.
So that also relates to economic issues and a person's economic mobility.
Yeah.
But
Medical
when it comes,
bankruptcy doesn't have to happen. Like, it doesn't happen in a lot of other countries. A lot of other
no,
countries that have their shit together. Sorry, I was going to try not to swear on this episode.
no, 100%. But when it comes to like the economy and presidents too, a lot of academic research has come up on what what the effect is. And I think I want a lot of people to kind of understand and realize is that when you have somebody in office, they have the potential to move markets, to set fiscal policy, but they don't come in there with a wand and say, let the economy perform, right? So same thing with, I'm a big fan of, Bill Clinton and Obama and the economic numbers under them. But they didn't come in either and say, boom, let there be good, increase in the stock market, higher wages, that sort of thing. So I think a lot of people, more so Trump supporters, thought that I guess the blinded economic performance of the state was a result of him coming in, being a businessman, waving that wand and say, let the economy do well. So here's a couple of things too when it comes to the economic performance is related back to, I guess, economics, is that markets don't exist in vacuum. When it comes, really what it comes down to is government setting rules, regulations on how the market functions. And they do that through regulations and through taxation, and your fiscal policy and your regulations have the potential to have the economic effect that you're looking for, right?
Could you regulate something like the people who are like avoiding taxes by putting their money in like offshore? Is that like something that could be regulated?
That's a good question. I can't. I don't really have any background on.
No, that's fair. I respect that.
Mm-hmm.
Saying
yeah.
When
Let me just call up my banker and make sure that my accounts in Ireland are secure. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to like the economic performance and how people are doing it, it's more so that administrations and the government government set the rules on how the economy actually functions, and how you structure those rules have an impact on what economic system that you want. So Denmark, for example, big capitalist state, but they have a strong social safety net and less inequality. Same thing with Brit.
Lindsay, who has been on this podcast before, my best friend who lives in Philadelphia, shout out to Gritty. Lindsay studied abroad in Denmark and loved it. And I think most of our fake policy proposals are modeled after Denmark, since she studied abroad there and liked it so much. I've never even been there. I just trust Lindsay's opinion.
Yeah, no. And going off of that too. So I think, I'm who, I like public policy. I like to compare what other states are doing, right? Mm-hmm. Going back to healthcare, there's not one well-developed country that doesn't offer universal healthcare. When Taiwan, and I think it was Taiwan in 1994, when they were looking to design a healthcare system, they didn't go to the United States and be like, oh yeah, I want that. Yeah. They actually did a more like a single payer kind of model developed.
Yeah. Well, what so I mean, like nobody, they look and be like, they have really bad health outcomes, but they pay a ton of money for it. That sounds good. Let's do that. And all of their citizens live in constant fear of medical bankruptcy. No, that's not a great operating system. And that currently is the system that America is operating from.
Oh, right. Yeah. I mean, one of my, favorite books that I own, was a book. I think it was actually published in 2008 before we had the Affordable Care Act, but it was basically a comparing the healthcare systems of other countries, Japan, France, Germany, and they all do it differently too. Like Germany has their system is universal, but it's more of an emphasis on private providers, right? Yeah. So you can have a system like that. You can have a system where where actually the administration of the healthcare system is through the provinces. So, if I were to pay a certain amount of my paycheck goes to the state of Illinois, and they provide, I don't know if that necessarily work here in the United States because we have a different structure than Canada does.
If this sounds interesting to you, we do have an episode about Medicare for All where we at least talked about Germany's. We don't come to a conclusion of what we could implement here, but there is if this is like piquing your interest and you haven't listened to the episode on Medicare for All or healthcare or whatever, I think it was probably called Medicare for All. Go
Did you
listen
already
to it.
film it?
Yes.
Okay, check it
Well-
out, viewer. Yeah, the viewers at home. For your misinformation, healthcare episode, right?
Yes. I think, yes,
Good
it's
plug-in.
probably called,
Yeah.
I think it's probably called Medicare for All. But it just talks about how this basically, like, it's a detailed episode about what we're talking about right now, and just how, like, what there are other options out there. It's crazy that we like live in the system that we live in, and we could do so much better. There's so many things that we could do better.
Yeah, and I think it takes courage too to actually, like, I think here in America where you have that sort of American exceptionalism kind of mentality where, you know, we do everything right, and you know, when it comes to healthcare, we fail. I mean, the way we treat middle class and poor people here in this country is awful. And a lot of people, they, you know, say freedom, but you kind of look at some numbers too. It's like, you know, Denmark, Sweden, for example, they lose their job, they keep their health insurance, and here you don't. So who's the more free, you know, right?
Yeah.
So like, you can measure, you know, levels of freedom. There's been studies on it too. But I think it takes the courage, as Americans to kind of point to other countries and say, hey, we can learn from them. We can build better systems, and we can't continue to be uptight on this whole American exceptionalism thing. We are an exceptional country. We've, you know, since World War II, I mean, there's been no country that really compares in terms of like influence, to us. I mean, going back to the election, if anyone were to go on BBC.com or the Toronto Star or CBC, front page is the American election, you know. So countries look to us on the decisions that we're making. But we also, I think, need to, when it comes to policy and good policy, look to see what other countries are doing. And quite frankly, that's the way you do anything. You know, if I'm an athlete,
you
I'm
don't
going to
have
look.
to like start from scratch. Why recreate the wheel?
Right. Like if I'm a quarterback, I'm going to look at how Patrick Mahomes performs, Aaron Rodgers. I'm going to study them. If I'm a baseball player, you know, Young Moncada or Lucas Giolito, I'm going to see their technique, and, you know, I'm going to learn from them. So why don't we do that with public policy at the federal level to other countries? And it kind of blows my mind. And going off of that too, I think there's a lot of fear mongering when it comes to things like ideas where, like the whole, you try to kind of have a conversation with somebody on some policy ideas, and they always bring up socialism.
Yeah.
Which is something that people have been, is a fear mechanism been using since Roosevelt became the president.
And they used it even though we nominated the most moderate candidate in the field, Joe Biden. So
right. Yeah. 100%.
No matter what.
Yeah. And exactly. And so like when it comes to things, when you throw out ideas, we can't live in a system where people suddenly, they put up the wall and they say, well, I think that's, you know, they start screaming socialism and
we like can't agree on facts. Like all the we kind of talked about this last week, but like all the Republicans in Congress are like completely divorced from like evidence-based policies. Like they can't even agree on climate change. And like they talk about the Green New Deal like it's, well, they talk about it being socialist, probably, I don't know. But just how expensive it is, and it's a jobs program. Like it's crazy. It's crazy. But anyway, we have to get rid of them because they're bad at their jobs. Like they don't look at like data and evidence-based things to decide what to do. Like Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, how are they senators?
Yeah. Well, I mean, look at, really the people in power shape the conversation, right?
Yeah.
I mean, going back to Louisiana, there's some studies. I don't know if you heard of the book, Strangers in Their Own Land, which is a very famous book from 2014, essentially. There's this research sociologist that went out and wanted to do a study on why people vote against their interests, more or less. So she looked at data on where to conduct her study from in terms of looking at very conservative counties, or in Louisiana, they're called parishes.
Hmm.
So she ended up in this parish in Louisiana to kind of learn and study and live with some families and what their values are, what is important to them, and going back to what is important to them. They're highly religious people, which is good, which is fine. I'm Catholic, and they really care about the some abortion issues, which is good, which is fine. But on the flip side, their schools are underfunded. There's not a lot of economic development in their parish or county. Not a lot of economic mobility opportunities for people in the region. Wages have stagnated. And so when you kind of tell people that, it's almost like the idea is that people are, despite the fiscal reality and well-being of people have very different realities based on what they're being told.
Mm-hmm.
And that is dangerous, because it has the power to shape false narratives on things too.
And we see
and I'm
there's
not
a lot
saying
of
that,
false narratives right now.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that, abortion is not an important issue, but, when you live in an area where you really have, that your schools are underperforming and wages are stagnated, and you really have to lift people up out of economic turmoil, increase their economic mobility, seems to me that should be a really big priority.
Yeah. What's really affecting you and all of your neighbors? Is it a woman deciding, well, whatever.
Yeah, I guess.
But yeah, like the things that are actually impacting your life, like I don't, my life is completely unaffected by abortion. And it's very, very much affected by, wage stagnation and stuff like that. I mean, I know that there are lots of people whose lives are impacted by abortion, but I don't know, just collectively, it seems like there's other things that they should be concerned about, like you said.
Well, right. And so I think that going off of that too, I think the concern is because there's a big disconnect that Joe Biden's going to be a socialist, despite what people, if I conducted a study and I asked people what socialism is, they wouldn't probably give an accurate definition of what socialism actually is. Mm-hmm. It's the government control the economy, the manufacturing and output of services from government to the economy. And nothing, at least the last time I checked, Joe Biden is not offering none of that. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to the interest of not only the people who are hurting right now, but all Americans, I was reading a study from Moody's Analytics, not from Fox News or even MSNBC from that area, but actually quantitative study that they actually looked at different scenarios from the presidential election, and they said that under a Joe Biden presidency, GDP would actually increase higher than Donald Trump. And you look at it and you look at the outcomes and say, well, why that is. And what people have to realize is that when it comes to economic depressions and slums, what the federal government really needs to do is spend a lot of money. They really have to invest and crank out stimulus programs to increase GDP. And
are we going to look back and be like, they gave us one $1,200 check during a whole pandemic that's going to last like 13 months or whatever?
Mm-hmm. Good point. Yeah, good point. And so a lot of people don't realize too, actually, technically, from like an economic term, that's what we got in May, April, March was actually not from an economic standpoint, was actually technically not a stimulus. It was actually a relief. What a stimulus actually is when that money is directed towards like job programs or most commonly is infrastructure. But to your point, the payments, definitely probably help some people for about a month. Right. And so what happens after that too? Well, if you don't have enough, if aggregate demand is increased, you have a lot of people, people do not have the ability then to spend money. And in a depressed economy, you want to increase aggregate demand by, for one, the government spending money. And so in turn, people spending money and getting the economy going. And there's a problem right now where historically, when you go into a depression, is the Federal Reserve steps up by lowering interest rates. Basically, when you lower the interest rate, it spurs demand. But right now, we're in a situation where interest rates are very, very low, near zero, and not a lot of people. That was before even COVID actually happened, the economic downturn. So when you have interest rates that are kind of near zero, there's something that happens called a liquidity trap. And what the liquidity trap essentially is a lot of people are overly saving at the macro level. And a lot of people say, well, shouldn't they be doing that? And when it comes to the macro economy, I'd probably say what makes the macro economy work is people spending on goods and services. And so when you simultaneously have millions of people trying to overly save, and for banks keeping more on reserves than actually wanting to lend out, that's a liquidity trap. And so to solve that, the government has to step up to spend a lot of money, put that money into, say, better stimulus programs such as infrastructure, get people employed in those infrastructure projects. We have a lot of roads and bridges that need repairing. I don't know if you've been down to central Illinois or southern Illinois, but it's awful. Yep. You can essentially increase demand that way. And going back to the Joe Biden thing, the reason why GDP is going to be higher than a Trump presidency is because Joe Biden knows what to do in terms of making having the federal government spend a lot of money to get us out of this economic slump.
Because he was vice president when Obama basically did a similar thing, right? Like,
yeah. So a lot of similarities, but a lot of differences with the Obama package. Similar where we were in the Great Recession. We were in a liquidity trap because interest rates were near zero, and you had a collapse in the banks, the financial system, and in order to sort of solve that, they passed the $787 billion stimulus, so roughly $800 billion stimulus program, which technically it served its role. It wasn't enough money, to be honest, because what happened with the money is a lot of it went to the bank, which it served its purpose. It tried to keep the economic system above water. But the way it failed was it didn't spend enough money, and really the relief went to more of the lower and middle class people, which was good, but you want that money to be allocated to actual like job programs, and the recovery sort of didn't kind of dragged on as longer as it did. I think really it ended, or the recession, the recovery started, I think, in June of 2009, and the stimulus package was passed, I think, the same year. So it did serve its role by saving the banks, and some relief did go to people who needed it. But in terms of widespread spending, what really the federal government has to do, same thing with Joe Biden, because I think Joe Biden knows it, is really crank out a bunch of money and spend on infrastructure programs. Don't be afraid to spend the money when it comes to economic recessions, because the data, if you look at it, shows that that's what you need to do, and it works. This can be another probably podcast episode. And I know people who are going to be watching this are saying, what about deficits and all that? And I'm welcome to talk deficits and why it's not as big of a deal as people think, but I won't bore people with that. So, yeah.
Well, no, I mean, yeah, well, there's a lot more that we'll have to talk about. I'm excited to have you on for more episodes so that I can ask more questions, and also means I don't have to do as much research about fiscal policy, which is not my favorite thing, but obviously it's important. Yes, I would love to talk more about, I don't know. I mean, actually, we
can talk more
touched
about
on,
deficit. Yeah, next episode.
we touched on
can
like a
talk more
lot of
about
stuff that I was like really hoping to. But yes, I was gonna say, but yes, we'll definitely, you're welcome to come back on whenever you have anything that you would like to share. If anybody has any like specific questions, our email is fymipod@gmail.com. Is there anything else that you wanted to make sure that we end on this?
I'd probably just say check out Prairie State Policy. I don't really talk much federal stuff on it. It's more directed towards Illinois and some issues that are related to Illinois and all that. We're going to be cranking out some cool content on like YouTube videos and all that. So check out the website, read the blog, Prairie State Policy. And I'd probably just end on saying that when it comes to fiscal monetary policy, it's going to be it matters. What Joe Biden does, I think, is going to be interesting to see how everything sort of plays out. I think that reading the study by Moody's, I think it is pretty accurate on their projections when it comes to enhancing the GDP. I'd probably also say too to people and viewers that there are probably going to be a lot of people who disagree with my statements when it comes to like stock markets and all that, but Ford came out with a really good comparison on actual stock market performance on presidents. And spoiler, even if you compared it with like Trump compared to others, it's not as good as people think. So of course, like you had the economic downturn this year starting in late February, but even looking at that stock market turnaround, it's not as good as what the common perception is. Actually, the biggest one was Bill Clinton in the 90s, if you look at the numbers when it comes to stock markets. So I would just urge your viewers, look at research. It's good to have a difference of opinion when it comes to a lot of things, but right now we're having a lot of misinformation being circulated a lot on social media. But when it comes to these complex issues, really, you got to turn off the TV, turn off Fox News, even turn off CNN and MSNBC, and read Forbes, read the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Chicago Tribune, studies, and you'd be fine that I think your freedom of thought, I think, will flourish, and I think you'd come back with a lot of open-mindedness on a lot of issues. And maybe it's the reverse too. Maybe you think that deficit spending during depressions isn't a good thing, which is fine, but just look at credible sources when it comes to a lot of the issues that are discussed on the podcast and currently what's going on right now.
So like if it seems like somebody can explain it to you in a very simple, digestible way, they're probably way oversimplifying it and you should not trust it. You should go do your own research.
Yeah, do your own research, I'd say. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you for joining me today, and I'm excited to talk to you again in the future. Let me know whenever you want to come back on.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Katie. Appreciate it. Thank you to the viewers, and we'll all be in touch.
Thank you guys so much for listening to For Your Misinformation. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast, and if you like it, give us a rating and a review. It helps us find more listeners, and the more of us there are, the better.
And make sure you're following along on Instagram and Twitter at FYMI Pod.
Shout out to Kyle Dibdahl for the intro and outro music, Hope Dye for the podcast art, and Ben Schlofelt for the audio production.
We come out with new episodes every Monday.
For Your Misinformation is part of the Demcast family of podcasts.